Welcome to Kuchi, a podcast where people from endangered and indigenous language communities around the world come together to share their experiences, challenges, and successes. In today's episode, we're talking about majority language influence on grammar and vocabulary. How do dominant languages leave their mark on minoritized languages, and what does that look like in everyday speech? We're joined by Felix Parker-Price, a Welsh speaker who works as a Welsh language translator at Aberystwyth University Students' Union and also serves as international officer for Cymdeithas Iaith, the Welsh language activist group founded in the 1960s. We're also joined by Maddi Kintana, a Basque speaker from Donostia, a Basque language teacher and a PhD candidate in Basque linguistics. And finally, you'll hear from me, Okandeo, a member of the Laz diaspora who grew up outside his community and is actively involved in teaching Laz and developing Laz language learning materials. In this episode, we explore how majority languages in our regions shape the way our own languages are spoken. How does English influence Welsh grammar? What are the patterns and rules of code switching in Laz? How does French affect Basque phonology? Join us to find out.
Kaixo, Maddi naiz, Donostiakoa naiz baina Baionan bizi naiz, eta doktoretza ikaslea naiz oraintxe bertan Euskal Herriko Unibertsitatean, eta AEKan irakaslea. So, hi, my name's Maddi. I'm from Donostia, San Sebastian, but I currently live in the northern Basque country in Bayona. I'm a Basque teacher in AEK, that's like the Basque Association to teach Basque for adults, not for kids. And it also promotes heavily the language. And at the same time, I'm also a PhD student in Basque linguistics, and I study language contact between French and Basque, as well as how the Basque youth speaks here in northern Basque country, most precisely in the Bayona area, which is an urban area. And I also research how they use code switching and interferences and loans from French to Basque. And well, I also know a little bit about, I've read about Spanish interference to Basque as well. So yeah, that's my domain of research. And also I'm a Basque independentist, and I'm active in Basque feminist movements. How about you, Felix?
Siwmai bob, Felix dwi'n byw yn Aberystwyth ac yn gweithio fel cyfieithydd yn undeb myfyrwyr Aberystwyth. Dwi ddim yn siarad Cymraeg fel iaith gyntaf, gan mod i wedi dysgu'r iaith yn y brifysgol. Bellach o gweithio fel cyfieithydd. So, I'm Felix. I work as a translator in Aberystwyth Students' Union in Ceredigion in West Wales. I'm actually originally from the north of England, so Welsh isn't my first language. I learned it as a student whilst doing Celtic studies. And I work currently as a translator for the Students' Union here in Aberystwyth. I'm the International Affairs Officer of Cymdeithas Iaith, which is a Welsh language activist group that was formed in the 1960s. And I'm also involved in a community union that fights for tenants' rights in Aberystwyth. So a lot of my activism is based on sort of tenants' rights and how, and sort of community organising, I suppose, and how that intersects with languages. But I also speak other Celtic languages like Irish or Breton, but not to as a high degree as Welsh. About yourself, Okan?
Muchore jumalepe dolalepe, ma Okani gemodzin, vitsoibo, ama hatsi Amerikas pskidur, edo Avrupas dobi badisheni, nana nenačkimi lazuri varen, babačkimi shi nana nenanačeni, mati amtsika domogu, edo, ma hatsi lazuri dobiguam, to amtsika doboguam. My name is Okandeo. I am part of the Laz diaspora. My family are from Wice. We're from the Oxen clan, or Chodzishi in Laz. I was born in Europe, but then moved to the US 3 years ago. And I speak Laz. I learned it later a little bit, but I also started teaching it now, and I work in curriculum design for Laz. As I said, I teach it. I work on tech for Laz, creating more resources, and I think I'm a very loud international Laz advocate at this point.
So, well, could you, Felix, please maybe explain to us like a little bit more about Welsh, like its context, where it's spoken, and maybe also like your background with it?
Of course. So Welsh is a Brythonic Celtic language, so it's closely related to Cornish and Breton, and more distantly to Irish, Scottish and Manx Gaelic. It's spoken primarily in Wales, in the west and northwest of Wales, with pockets in the south. However, there is actually an area of Argentina where Welsh is spoken due to a little colonial venture in the 19th century. But Welsh is spoken by maybe about 14% of the population of 3 million. About, you could say there are conservative and then there are more optimistic counting like numbers. The most optimistic being in around 800,000, and the more conservative of who actually speaks it or speaks it fluently seems to be around 350,000 to 400,000. So, and where I live in Ceredigion, about 45% of the entire region can speak Welsh, but it's dropping every 10 years. So we have censuses, so you can see. So my relation to the language is heavily tied to this area. With Aberystwyth, I learnt it in university doing Celtic studies, which was an intensive course for learning Celtic languages, specifically Welsh, with Irish as well. And so I'm obviously originally from the north of England, but there is also enough of a Welsh-speaking community in Aberystwyth that I live in Welsh most of my days. It's about 33% here in Aberystwyth, which isn't considered the strongest, but there's still there are strong networks, you could say. How about what is the situation with Basque? I know it differs from different places, but in Bayona.
Yeah, so, well, as you already know, because I've talked about it a little bit like on other like previous episodes, Basque is a language isolate. That means it doesn't have any language family ties to any existing language, or that has existed for now, like theoretically. Now there are like some new theories, but it's spoken in the Basque country, nestled between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pyrenees. And yeah, like the situation is vastly different depending on the administrative place. I would say in Bayona it's really low, like around 8% can speak Basque, and what does that mean? It's not really clear either. But overall in the Basque country it's around, it depends. There are also like many numbers, like some say 1 million out of 3 million. That's really optimistic. I don't think that's true at all. I would say around 700,000 people speak Basque or are able to speak in Basque, like in their day-to-day. So that means like that's a third part of the population. But that's like the overall view. Like it depends. Here it's like almost no one that speaks Basque. If you look at the northern Basque country, it will be also around 20% that speaks Basque, but it's mostly in rural areas. And in the south, it depends also on the city. Like where I'm from, it's spoken by a third of the city in Donostia, but in others, it's like around 10%. And in small towns, it can get till 80%. It depends where. So you can see like the situation varies really from town to town or from city to city, from administrative region to another administrative region. And yeah, like Basque is my L1. Both my parents spoke to me in Basque, even though my mom was a new speaker. And I've been raised in Basque, and I've studied my whole life in Basque. Like all my education has been in Basque till now. My PhD is also in Basque. So how about you, Okan?
Yeah, so Laz is a South Caucasian language. Some people call it Kartvelian languages for family, but we Laz predominantly prefer the term South Caucasian because Kartvelian essentially derives from the word for Georgian itself, which is a different language. We are related. We don't deny that, but we're not a sub language of Georgian. We're our own branch within the family. Language speaker numbers. Oh, it's very interesting. If you look at the Turkish wiki page, I think what was it the other day? It's like over 500,000 speakers. Sometimes you can see even 1 million speakers. It's like, come on, do we even have that many last people? And the English page is definitely a bit more on the cautious side and just lists around 50 to, I forget what the number was, but I usually say 50 to 70k fluent native speakers. And the language itself is obviously spoken in northeast Turkey and southwest Georgia, predominantly on the Turkish side though, and a tiny bit in the Georgian side. It's also interesting because the language is not related to Turkish, though we do have a language family, as I said, unlike Basque, which as of now is not really. I mean, surely Basque had a language family, but unfortunately most of the sister languages died out, unfortunately. Though I have a Basque student who is working on connecting the South Caucasian languages with Basque. It's a theory. If you could see Machi's face right now, you could see how much she believes that theory. Do you want to say something about that, Machi?
Well, I think they've been trying to tie Basque to many languages, but there isn't enough proof to tie to anything existent right now. That's what I have to say.
I agree. Just having the ergative is not enough proof to take these languages. So that's us, our language in a nutshell. Machi, what are the Basque people up to? Can you tell us a bit more what they're up to these days?
Well, there's a lot going on. I feel like right now there is a huge mass effort to reactivate the Basque population, and also because we, since the 70s, like because of Francoism, like the dictatorship in the south, and in France with centralism and post World War One, like Basque was almost in some places extinguished. So at the 70s, like in the 70s, they tried a huge process of revitalization, and they really did a huge job. Like they went from like I think 10% of speakers to like 25%. So that's a whole lot for like the second millennia. And then since the year 2000, it's been like in a plateau. Like it didn't really change. It went a little bit high, lower, like the percentage of speakers and people that use the language, which are also like correlated. And so right now there is a huge, like we call it urgence, like crisis. We are in a state of linguistic crisis where we are not able to go further than what we've done, like through mass effort and social movements. So there are like a lot of efforts to ignite again the fight for Basque. Like there are like some demonstrations, there have been like some huge events where they've reunited people to create another atmosphere. So I feel like people are trying to find new treaties or new alliances to work for Basque and to see how we can go further. But I feel like we are always like hitting against a wall because in the south, in some parts it's official, and it seems like by law it's it should be like kept and safe, but it's not. Like there are a lot of court cases against Basque right now where like they don't want to apply the law and they're like agreeing to it. And then in the northern Basque country there's a huge crisis because there is not enough like money for everything that needs to be done. And there is like it's not official, so there isn't like no law that says you have to ensure this and this and this. So it's always like a fight and negotiations with other like entities to get like more money, more resources and everything. So I think right now we are like in the verge of a crisis with the linguistic status, because we realized what we did was great, but it's not enough to save the language for the coming like 50 years. So I would say it is that way. I don't know if it is like that or it is differently in Wales.
I mean, even like what I said with the numbers earlier, some people might argue what I said with the numbers, they might be a bit higher, it might be a bit lower. But Welsh has been seeing a decline, but since 1997, there was a form of autonomy given to Wales by the British state after a referendum, which is very close. It actually failed in the 1970s, I think, when it first was tried. And since 2011, there's like legal measures to officially recognise and enforce standards of the Welsh language called the Welsh Language Measure in 2011. There's been a creation of a parliament in Cardiff, and there are Welsh language schools, and a bit like in the Basque country, you can go from the moment you go into education, you can go until you go up to, you can do a PhD in Welsh and all that. In theory, you can do all your education in Welsh. There are Welsh language schools, there are bilingual schools, which are mixed, and then there are English language schools which have Welsh taught in them. I would say that Welsh is, like a bit like in the Basque country, there are some areas where it's still 90% speak Welsh, and 80% plus of the kids speak Welsh at home, so you could say that's more stable. But then there are areas like this where it fluctuates. In this region, there are some places where it's 80%, some places it's like 20%, 5% I've seen in a supposedly Welsh-speaking heartland. So we're encountering a lot of break in transmission, but loads of, because I'd say I call it an undemocratic economic system, and a second home crisis and holiday homes crisis that was never resolved since the 1970s or 80s. We're just living in the extremes of it now. So there are, unfortunately, in most of the Welsh-speaking areas, there are few jobs, there are few homes. People, like young people, leave. Mostly Welsh-speaking people leave the heartlands, often never to come back. And this specific region, Ceredigion, is the worst in all of Wales for losing young people. So they don't stay, they don't raise their kids in Welsh. And there's been a sort of, you could say, gentrification of Welsh-speaking areas as well, where you can have socially mobile, more middle-class people from England moving and buying up homes in Wales, and that's been intensifying since COVID, sort of urban flight and remote working. And so there are lots of different pressures. Obviously, English has only become more and more powerful, so English has become more and more dominant. You know, even like you could say, like internet, social media, decline of traditional media, so like Netflix and all that, they've all mean that English is even more present. So, but there are committed activists, and the fight's not over. It's not safe. Even though there's been sort of a creation of a new sort of like Welsh-speaking middle class after the 1997 that seem to think that everything's all right because they have nice jobs and they work in media or government jobs or what have you, and they can speak Welsh every day, so it doesn't really matter. So it's complicated.
You obviously said you're not from Wales directly, so how was it learning the language? How was it perceived by like all the generations, people who are fluent, people who are not fluent? How did they react to you, and how do they react to you now?
It's a good question. For the most part, I've had a very positive experience. I actually chose to live in Welsh-speaking halls of residence at university, so where first language Welsh speakers go to live, to choose to live in Welsh in university, which did help. However, I don't know. I didn't I made friends who spoke Welsh as their first language by living there. I mean, like anything, it can be a bit cliquey. It's not a criticism of the people. It's just it can how it goes. But everyone, I'd say for the most part, were very friendly, very welcoming. They're actually quite happy the fact that there's an English person learning Welsh. And the thing is, I suppose, if they were ever saying anything about me, I was learning, so I couldn't even understand them anyway. So, but older generation, most people have been very, very welcoming. I've only really encountered I know I have had friends who've had negative encounters, and that tends to be Welsh people who don't come from Welsh-speaking backgrounds. So I'm lucky that probably from the university context, and when you can sort of find your own people at university, if you were lucky like me, you can come across people who were very welcoming. Whereas, yeah, you can have people who don't have time for learners. They don't want to talk to you if you don't speak their kind of Welsh, or it's not everyone's a language teacher, so some people have more patience than others. So I'm very lucky, and now I can speak Welsh to a high enough level that I can pass for a Welsh person for the most part. I speak Welsh with my girlfriend, and I speak Welsh with her grandparents. You know, it's most people are very very pleasantly surprised when I tell them I'm from England originally. I'm very lucky that I've had a very positive reaction and experience overall.
So Felix, tell me, like we are talking about the main hegemonic languages' influence on the minority language, right? And in your case, it's English. So how do you see English influence in Welsh? Like, does it affect day-to-day Welsh? Does it affect youth speech? Does it affect the informal speech too? Is it something recent? Like, tell us a little bit more maybe about it.
So I'd say English affects everything. It penetrates every aspect of society now, you could say. It depends on, I think, like any minoritized language, it depends where you live, because there are some areas where you probably won't hear English spoken that much in Wales if you live in an area where the Welsh is the majority language, or if it's where most of the community speak Welsh. However, obviously, especially amongst young people, there's a small, it's not all young people who, even if they speak Welsh every day, they might use social media in English, or even some of them text in English. And then things like with the decline of television, which introduced English to everybody's homes, for most cases, in the past few decades anyway, but with Netflix and all that, which doesn't have that many Welsh options, English is very present. And then things like TikTok, or even people playing games like Fortnite, and Minecraft, a lot of those things, technically in Welsh, some of them, but there is a huge influence even in areas where people would have very little in contact with English outside of learning it in schools. Historically, in some areas, especially where Welsh is most dominant, people would have only learned English in school, but if you wanted to interact with the state, you had to use English. However, now there are also more and more English people, or monoglot English speakers, moving to Welsh-speaking areas. So there are now some areas where 20 years ago you wouldn't have heard that much English. There's a lot more. So where I live, like I say, I can live most of my life speaking Welsh, but I can't not speak English as well. It's ever present. So it's a very big and increasing presence in people's lives. And it depends, if you want to go to the shops, you in a town like Aberystwyth, you have to know who speaks Welsh where you can go speak it. Whereas if you were living in somewhere like Carnarvon in the northwest, you can usually, I'd say 9 times out of 10, speak to someone in Welsh and they're probably going to speak Welsh. So it depends really, but yeah, and that it infiltrates into every aspect.
Do you have any examples maybe you can tell us more about how English influenced it?
You can hear it through whether it's like loan words, so there are lots of words coming into into Welsh through English. That's quite a common one with any language. But obviously, where English is becoming more dominant, or come down to expression, loan words, use of phrases, because of, like, say for example TikTok and all that. I work in translation, so there are so many phrases and cultural references coming from English that sometimes I can't translate into Welsh because there's no equivalent, or sort of like Anglo-American culture is so prevalent and powerful. If it's infiltrating into if it's found in languages like French, it's even more profoundly felt in Welsh, and it's quite hard. I wouldn't say I have the answers of what you do against that, but or if you can, but you can observe that people's expression in Welsh sometimes becomes more influenced by English. It depends on how strong the language is in the region. I think there's always like a context or a story. What is a person's relationship to the language every day, and historically. So it can be a subject of quite a lot of criticism and guilt in Welsh if you're perceived of relying on English too much. If you use in media, especially, you get people complaining. They said you said that too English, or if you said I use that English word. So it's a bit of a minefield. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. If you'd like more.
No, definitely, yeah. No, but I want to hear from Machi now, because I saw her nodding a lot. So what do you think, Machi?
Well, I think everything that you said also happens here with French and Spanish. Also English, of course, because of the Anglosphere. And I want you to, I wanted to know too, and maybe you can answer later, but if those loans are pronounced the English way or the Welsh way, because that's something that happens here too.
They can be. If it's in a very strong Welsh-speaking area, they'll pronounce it in the Welsh way. But if not, it'll probably a more like of an English language pronunciation. But yeah, it does happen.
Okay, because that's one of the funniest aspects of language contact, right? Where how does it evolve into the new language? So yeah, I feel like what you said is also true here. With the television thing that spread Spanish and French also, and then now with the screens, people not watching television anymore. We had we have an actual Basque national television that's in Basque, and we used to watch that when we were kids, but right now no one watches that anymore. Everyone's on YouTube or something, and it's really difficult to compete with hegemonic languages there, where they are super present and they appear there. So of course French and Spanish language is great. So well, in my study I've just mostly focused on youth and concretely from here, but I think that can apply almost to everyone. We can find French and Spanish influence in a lot of things, starting from the grammar, the syntactic structure of the sentences. People will just use the same syntactic order as in Spanish or French. Even verbs that we use, for example, yeah.
Can you just briefly tell us, is Basque SVO or is it different?
Yeah, Basque is a really flexible language, so it is SOV usually. That's the neutral order. It's SOV, but it's really flexible. You can really mix it up. It will change where you put the stress on the sentence. But the neutral one would be SOV, and French and Spanish are SVO. But that's not just the verb positioning. It's mostly for example, what would you use to start a sentence? You wouldn't put that way in Basque if you didn't have any influence from French or Spanish. And also something that happens here is northern and southern Basque are evolving also differently because of like those two influences. So they are like diverging instead of like the standard gave us like a convergence, and we're really thankful for that. But this extreme influence in our case is making us diverge from each other. So we don't only have like one hegemonic languages, we have two. So yeah, and we see that like similar processes are happening in both of them. Like you can really say, oh, what that happens with Spanish, that happens with French. But the difference is French has a really different phonetic inventory. Like Spanish and Basque evolved from the same like phonetic kind of point, so they are quite similar even though there are differences, and it's also affecting how we speak. But the French one is super different. So for example, like 100 years ago, when people wouldn't have televisions, when people wouldn't know French, here like if a loan word arrived to French, they was just like in French you have like more than 10 vowels, so they will just like put it in Basque. We have 5 vowels, so they will just put it into one of those 5 vowels. And nowadays you have like really hybrids where people will and that's what happens with young people. Usually they will take like the word in French, how it's said in French, with all those different like vowels. Also the nasals don't exist in Basque, and in French they do. And also like all those sounds, they will take the word exactly as it is and add the verb suffix or the verb morpheme at the end in Basque. So there will be like some hybrids too that will happen like phonetically and syntactically. So it's really interesting to see like what happens. And same like we will translate like expressions from French to Basque. What else? Like code switching, of course, but that's also like something that happens. Like for example with discourse markers are starting to be like heavily French. So I would say you have all of those. And yeah, English too is coming in, but it is really interesting because it's not directly as it is pronounced in English, and they don't either adapt it to the Basque phonology, phonetic phonology. They take the French version of the English word and use it in Basque. So there's like a whole process that goes into it. So yeah, it is really, really big. And I feel like if you were to listen to a friend group from Bayona speak in Basque between them and like between like the same group, and you weren't from Northern Basque Country, and you only speak like Basque from the south, you would have a hard time understanding what they are saying. Not because of the Basque, but because of the great French influence, and vice versa. And I've had that happen to me like all the time, like when friends come over from Donostia and speak with people, like I have to say, oh, that's like how we would say it, or like, but it's always like also in reference with what Spanish word they tied up to. And yeah, so we have to all the time like adapt and also translate sometimes. So it is a huge influence actually, yeah. And yeah, it's really a product of this system, right? This oppression system of linguicide and having like heavy diglossia. But that is, yeah, I don't know.
So, sorry, it was a very, very detailed answer. Thank you. I was just wondering if you could give us an example of one of those words, especially when you said we add the Basque suffix to it. That'd be interesting to hear.
For example, you have I don't know, engueuler. Engueuler means in French to have like to have a discussion with someone, and they will take this ge, that sound doesn't exist in Basque. Et en, this nasal also doesn't exist in Basque. But you will listen to people say, in Basque, we use for the past participle the tu form sometimes at the end of the verb. So hartu will be like taken, the tu at the end. And so they will, when we are like talking, they will take the engueuler and add the tu and say, for example, bye, engueula tu nice. So yeah, we were like discussing, fighting. And it's like, and at the first time, yeah, it's crazy. Like when you first listen, you are like, wow, like you are really like mixing everything. That also means that like French phonology is deeply ingrained here because they don't adapt it. Like you can just like use it like at the same time. Whereas when if it weren't that ingrained, it would take like a long time to do it. So yeah, that's one example. Or I don't know if that happens also like in your languages, but like they will take like a French word and put like the article. Basque uses suffixes like postpositions, so we would put the article at the end of the word, like it's the a, usually the. And for example, I don't know, like Scotch, like they will say in French Scotch, and they'll say scotcha, like the article inside. So for example, so I don't know how it is in your case with Turkish and Laz.
Yeah, so in general, overall, as you guys mentioned before, definitely the same case in Laz as well. It's been heavily influenced by Turkish. And as you said, French in the northern side for you. For us, it's Georgian on the northern side. Which again, it's just 2 villages really, but they're still influenced heavily. I don't know that many people from that region. It would be lovely, interesting to hear them, because Georgian is related to Laz. I do wonder what the influence is like, if it's more natural, if they like converge in a way that makes sense, because the way Turkish influences Laz obviously does not make sense because Laz is very different. Syntactically speaking though, Laz and Turkish are both SOV languages. So it just invites more influence, obviously, because of that. It just ties in more naturally. Both use suffixes for a lot. For like, we use postpositions in both languages, really. So it's even though these languages are not related at all, they come from completely different parts of the world. There's so many similarities that, like, me working on my projects, we can talk about in a bit. It's just very interesting to see when you suddenly question yourself, like, what is actually actual Laz and what has been influenced by Turkish. But because the syntax is so similar and the structures are very similar as well, even though they're completely different languages, it's sometimes just so hard to tell. And obviously, just in general, the younger people are struggling with the Laz sounds itself, creating these sounds. I don't know if that's the case for you guys.
Yeah.
You're nodding, so I guess that's a yes. And they, like, when you compare the older generations to the younger ones, especially in terms of using Turkish loanwords, what we get is my grandparents. Just look at my grandparents. They can't pronounce the letter or the sound u, which are sounds in Turkish and really dominant sounds in Turkish. Those don't exist in Laz. So, and me as a teacher, I can just take this great example. The word for homework in Turkish is ödev. So when I speak Laz and when I teach my students, I obviously make it adjusted to Laz. So I just say ödev. So we change the to an o. Sometimes it's a y, so yo or you sound. But usually, if it's at the beginning of a word, it's just ödev. But if you speak to younger people, they would say ödev. Ödev içgimi, for example, my homework. So because they can pronounce the Turkish sounds, it's a bit sad though, because I don't mind if they want to pronounce it the Turkish way. It's in the end, it's a Turkish word, so I don't mind if you want to pronounce it that way. But they often can't pronounce the Laz letters or Laz sounds anymore, and that concerns me a little bit more, which makes sense because if you're educated in Turkish, you learn the alphabet, you learn every letter is attached to a sound, at least in Turkish, then these other sounds don't make any sense for you. You might be able to hear, you might be able to distinguish them when you hear them, but I can tell you it's less and less so. And that's a bit sad, but it is the reality. And in terms of grammar, as I said, it's a bit harder to pick sometimes to understand where the grammar has been influenced heavily outside of the verbs. You can immediately tell by the verbs because verbs in Laz, and I know in Basque as well, though to a lesser extent, I think, need to reflect subjects and objects at the same time. So I see you is different from I see him or her. And that's something we noticed amongst Laz learners, well, not even learners, native speakers at this point too, younger native speakers, both geographically speaking and age-wise, have been influenced more by Turkish. So especially on the western side, they start speaking and I'm going to give you an example now because we discussed them earlier. The word for I love you in one of the dialects, I don't know why, but we've got like, let's say about 5 dialects, 4 to 5 dialects, major dialects. And every dialect has a different way of saying I love you, which I don't know why, but it's nice. Anyway, so that dialect, that region says Mauropen for I love him or her. But if you go to the older generation, or sometimes like further up in the mountains, if you ask them, they would say I love you is Mauroper with an R at the end. And Mauropen means I love him or her. Though, what younger people started doing, and also like, again, as I said, based on where they located, older people as well, when you ask them, how would you say I love you then? Some of them would just say ma, si, Mauropen. So if you translate that, it would be I love him or her. Which for the other regions just sounds like gibberish almost, because it doesn't make any sense. How can you say I love him, her? Who do you love now? Tell me. And then some regions, as I said, still have that distinction, Mauropet, where it says, oh, I love you. And that's just very interesting for me because I was working on a project earlier, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit. That's one of the major influences I've noticed in terms of verbs. You can definitely tell in the verbs that Turkish has influenced it a lot. Vocab, obviously, but like, you guys can tell me actually. But for me, like the core structure of a language almost is often the grammar, really, because it's harder to penetrate the grammar than it is vocab. What do you guys think?
Well, I think also grammar is like we sometimes there's been like changes over time that we don't even like notice as being alone, but they've been. So, but it's true, like it takes a greater time to change grammar, I think, and to consolidate it. But also like pronunciation is quite hard to change. And I feel like what you said, like I totally understood what you were saying about Turkey, like Turkish sounds penetrating las, and like las young las speakers not being able to pronounce and produce some sounds. That also happens in Basque. And I think like it's been because of a mix, like it's not, I don't think it's a coincidence that it's happening at the same time for us, like that kind of great change. It has happened before, like of course there's been like many phonetical changes and also like grammar changes, like for example like Latin heavily impacted on like Basque grammar, like Basque grammar as it is nowadays is directly also derived of Latin contact. Yeah, I think it is something that the thing is like it is really touchy to talk about accent and how we talk because it's like with our body. It can be a really touchy subject, a really emotional subject too, because some are simply not able to pronounce some things. And I feel like that we don't talk about it because of that, because we are afraid of hurting the others and hurting each other or like touching some fiber. And I think we should like not judging, but like talk about it and say like, I think our also like phonetic and phoneme inventories and our like sounds nowadays are part of our language, are a core part of it, and they make it what it is. And I think we should also like raise, I don't know, awareness or talk about it at least, and because it's really like we don't talk about it. Like and I agree, like if you talk Basque and you've like, even if you don't have a perfect pronunciation, like I will be really happy, but I think it isn't talked enough or taught enough either, and people are like really too like, I don't want to hurt you, and so it's also like a touchy subject, I think. I don't know.
Can you give us a sound as an example so we can hear?
For example, in Basque we have two R's. We have ere and R, kind of like Spanish, but the second R is harder. And in northern Basque country, because of French contact, that has almost like disappeared. So they say ere and they say ere, like as in French, or slightly harder than in French. And that has been like in the past 100 years, it's been like that, like the R has been really like it's gone. Like there's only like old people that use it, or like in some places that is in the border with the southern Basque country, but mostly everyone says R instead of r. And the thing is, like, those two sounds exist because they give a distinct meaning. Like, it's not the same in Basque ere or erre, which ere is to and erre is to burn, for example. So you see, like, it's widely, like, it gives like widely different words. And right now, because of the lack of the r, and because in French they don't have, they only have only one r, there is a complete like mix up of the sounds, and you end up having people like pronouncing the r sound like r, and end up like saying all the r sounds like as in French, and that creates a lot of like problems in our understanding of the language, because like that they were made to separate the meanings of the two words. So we have that going on with the trill, like the r, for example. I don't know if you understood it, or like you need like any more examples, but I don't know. Like, for example, beer is garagardo. So someone that's fluent in Basque from northern Basque country would say usually garagardo. But recently, and younger speakers and also people that have just learned Basque, they would say garagardo, which is wrong, and thus like not separating the two sounds. So that's an example. So maybe Felix, can you tell us like about your case?
Yeah, so Welsh has sounds in it that English don't. So like ell, the double L, ch, and then the vowel sounds are very pure, a bit more like Basque almost, is a, e, o, u. It's and then there are like I and a and o, ow, and all this stuff. So those are like, whereas English it's a bit more blurry, and that comes into their Welsh at times. Depends where you are really, and like you can hear. It's sometimes when, like, I think it's like, I don't know, like the language tax from like being dominated by a majority language, like, and then also just that languages do change. Some of them are more natural in Welsh. There have sort of been simplifications of the language, because Welsh has a very, like all Celtic languages, has mutations. So, for example, Bangor is a city in North Wales. So if you're going to Bangor, I Fangor. If you're from Bangor, it's O Fangor. And then if you're in Bangor, it's Mangor. So those are quite... Those are big core features that imply possession, location, movement. However, that's sort of been simplified, and I know that even like older generation, like people in the 90s, some of them don't make all those distinctions. So you can sort of like, you don't have to be that strict. And I'd say when I tell people who are learning Welsh and they worry so much about mutations, it's one of those things, I'm sure every language has it, especially minoritized languages, when you say, oh, this feature of language X, it's impossible, you can't do it. Mutations is one of those big things. And I tell people, get a decent learned basis in the of mutations, and then listen to how native speakers don't use them, because I think if you do them too well, sometimes in some contexts you actually get judged by some people. They say, "Oh, that's posh Welsh," or there's like, I think it's hugely like the social context, socio-economic context as well as, you know, if I think we can't ignore those factors. Why and but also obviously like language change is a social thing, and like with terms of like some sounds that English doesn't have, like most English dialects don't have r anymore, and there's r and r in Welsh, and you can hear if people come from an area where English is becoming more dominant, if they haven't been socialising in Welsh, or if they come from an area where Welsh died a few generations ago, a lot of them will have quite an English in Welsh. So like chwarae, to play, sometimes becomes chwarae, or you know, you get this sound. I don't think it's the end of the world if someone speaks like that. But it is noticeable, and like Welsh expressions or like English expressions in Welsh. Some of them can be quite, like in Basque, or las, it's natural. Sometimes they'll be absorbed, they'll be Welshified. But like there are certain things like I notice with like use of prepositions quite important in Welsh because you have to conjugate them. So to me or to her, like make an entire thing. So like you have to, and then he, her becomes iddi. But the thing is, a lot of these things aren't taught in school either. So I think, like there are many native speakers of Welsh who don't know how to do these things because they're not taught in school. But I think, like you say, with like, if it's not just school, it's also like an indication of the social environment and what their sort of interaction with the language is. Even like most people aren't aware of what their use of language is. Because if I were to tell someone in the street, I'd like say like, oh, you didn't conjugate that one properly, they'd be like, what are you on about? I think to be aware of it's probably is a bit, I don't know, it's almost a privilege in a way, but most people aren't really aware of it. But I think one of the things like I've heard with like Welsh being influenced by English is like, like in English you can say, what are you up to? You can leave a preposition hanging at the end of a phrase, or like there's all like in English you have going down and going up and cutting up, and those seep into Welsh because like getting, like the idea of getting up, like in most languages you don't have to say up, you raise, you get up. Like in Welsh it's codi, you don't need codi lan, you don't need get up, you just have the verb to get up, to rise, and then you have things like Beti fyny I, like what are you up to, literally from English. And I've heard in instances in Aberystwyth when someone who I think was learning Welsh said that to an older Welsh speaker, and she didn't understand him at first and sort of went, what? And then he repeated himself, and maybe there are probably more like Welsher ways of but I think one of the main things of that was lovely that a young man spontaneously spoke Welsh to someone unprompted, but I think Mandy's touched on quite an interesting point, that how do you bring this up, because most people will take it as a personal attack or a personal criticism. I think where do you have the spaces where you can, or when people say, you can give them an opportunity to say, well actually I'm open to someone helping me, where, because sometimes like on media and all this, because you can be criticised for not conjugating things properly, or using the English word and Welshifying it, which I think is in some of the really dominant Welsh speaking areas, they have really strong Welsh syntax, but they just get English words and they Welshify them, and I'm glad people still speak Welsh. But if people want to help, I think it's sort of like a journey, because I'm someone who's learned, and so having someone really harshly criticize you could really topple someone's confidence, and then completely, or even native speakers, that we take it for granted, or that sometimes, especially like I was coming from the outside, that everybody loves Welsh, but some people have had really difficult interactions with the language. They might speak it at home, but due to different factors, they spoke English with their friends. You never know. So, like you say, there's always a reason why I think sort of criticizing the individual is probably not the way forward.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Funny enough, though, I just want to say that for us, especially the R sound is the opposite. Turkish has the R sound, but Laz doesn't really have it. It depends on where you are. But now the younger people do pronounce the R like it whereas the oldest don't pronounce it. Like my grandparents can't pronounce it. So for us, it's the other way around, where we didn't have it, but now we do have it, and now it's like overshadowing the actual R we used to have, which is usually a Y sound. Though, that's a very good point, Felix. Especially the criticism, how to deal with it, and also how to accept it and embrace it, because you just said in some areas they just absorb the English word and just Welshify it, which we do as well in Laz, and I think that's the way forward, to be honest, for us at least. How is it in Basque? How do you guys deal with the influence? How do you try to embrace it in a way that just makes sense, because you can't shield yourself off, obviously, and how do you do it on an individual level?
That's a really hard question. I get that question all the time. Like every time I've done an interview on that, everyone has asked me that question, and I don't have an answer, honestly. Like, I have multiple answers maybe, but like not a definitive one. Because yeah, like on one side, and I completely agree with what Felix said. I prefer to have someone speaking in Basque with a few French words than not speaking in Basque at all. Like, that is something like, I mean, that's the situation of our languages, where they are endangered till that point, right? But on the same time, I think we should also like talk about the issue of it being inherently political. Like, it's not just something that happens naturally. And I think there's been also like some discourses, and I think they come mostly also from men, that just like to point it out as a natural thing that occurs in language to take like influence. And I mean, that happens everywhere. Like, every language in the world has some influence of some way, but it is not normal to have, or it shouldn't be normal to have like that huge input like in such a short time from a dominant language. Like, there is an obvious like power issue there. And I think it is really important that we talk about it, that we just like say, yeah, like, we don't want to start like criticizing how you speak. We don't want to like tell you like you speak bad or you speak like in a French manner or so. We don't want to like subject you to criticism in that kind of way, but we should definitely start talking about why do we speak the way do we speak. Like, I mean, like, even us, like, I don't know, I'm a native like Basque speaker, and I have like influence, of course. Like, we live in this context. So I really think it is really important to create awareness, to also like spread this discourse where we say this isn't happening naturally. This is a construct that's been going on because of all those laws, like all this input that's been going on here because of political reasons. Like, it is inherently political, like how we use our language. And also, usually we start like criticizing how young people speak, how people speak like in also like marginal or like not so like poor neighborhoods. It's also like tied to class in that sense, I think. We accept it easier when it's someone that has like a high academic background that uses a French or a Spanish word, I think, too. So it's really intertwined, and I think we should like develop like a political discourse like for that, and say, yeah, like, speak Basque and don't feel shame for putting French or Spanish words into it, but at the same time, why do we speak like this? Like, should we like maybe like reflect on it, and what do we want for our language? Like, it is like language contact is normal, but there is always like power dynamics, and in this case the power dynamics are so great. It's like, I don't even like to use diglossia as a term with Basque, because that means like Basque would be like confined to some sectors, but like it is not confined to any sectors at all right now. Maybe some little towns, but we Basque people mostly try to speak where we can, because we don't have any spaces for us. Maybe like some dance teaching course, but like not anymore either. So I don't know if it answers your question, but I definitely think it is one of the key points. And I also think like having more reference, like for youth, like in social media that speak Basque without like putting much Spanish or French input into, like maybe like translations that could work, because there's also like this other question that comes to me when we are like, oh, we should use Spanish or French words. I'm like, that's great, but the other side of the Basque country won't understand you. And here we want to have like a unified Basque country that feels like a nation, and that goes against it too. So I don't know. That's many of the thoughts that I have on the issue. I don't know. Maybe Felix, like, do you have any other like how to deal with it?
I think you have probably a better idea than me, but I think you're right. It's inherently political. I think you can't see it as detached from politics and social economic conditions. I think it's, as long as we like in Cymdeithas Iaith, the motto is everything has to change, because I think if you're okay with this society, as in like the only thing your main problem with Welsh these days is that kids use too many English words, or that the syntax is too influenced by English, I think that you're sort of missing the point, because there's people can't live in Welsh-speaking regions. There's like a complete like decline in living standards, and I think like I've heard people from like middle-class Welsh-speaking people who've criticised working-class Welsh speakers and saying that they speak shit Welsh, pardon my French, and I think I'm glad if I start speaking Welsh tomorrow, those people carry on speaking Welsh and they'll speak it to their kids. I'm glad that exists in many respects. I don't care what you think their idea of good or bad Welsh is, but if there are some people who can, because like Wales and like a lot of these Welsh-speaking regions, they're relative to a Western European country. Wales is one of the poorest areas of Western Europe. There are pretty high levels of poverty in Welsh-speaking regions. If people can't feed their kids, they're not going to care about using Welsh properly, or what they think is, how they should be using Welsh. I think that's one thing. I think societal, like rethinking how we use society, but making spaces where, if people are open to it, I think maybe being more aware of it. I think maybe if you are an activist, I think questioning usage, questioning influence, I think it's a good one, because obviously English is my first language, so I've tried to be aware of how much my mother tongue influences my Welsh, and I've tried to learn not to be puritanical. I just, as a translator, I always want to know how many options there are to express any given thing, but it's true, it's a hard one. I help run a Welsh language learning group every week, and there are people who are at different stages of learning Welsh, and that's obviously different because they're not native speakers, but I don't constantly criticise them. I let people just speak, and then sometimes I say, can I help you, or something, because usually people come because they want to be helped. If they say it's the context. I think trying to score points on each other for getting it wrong or humiliating people on media or social media is just not going to do it. Or just complaining for the sake of complaining and saying, the language is dead or going to die because of this. It's so much more complicated than that. And there's some sort of pilot scheme in that was used in North Wales in Anglesey recently by the Welsh government. It was something called, it's called Hopi Hyder or something like that, or something like boost to confidence. And it was essentially helping people who feel like their Welsh wasn't good enough to be sort of reintegrated into the Welsh language in workplaces, but that's not necessarily for this. Maybe for people who maybe they're native speakers, maybe they're not, but that's to help people come back into the language. I think sort of when it's done empathetically and inclusively, I think it's those sort of schemes are better. Or if certain activist groups, I don't know, maybe, or times even more so has become is an issue. But if you had classes who were saying like, do you want to like refine your Welsh? Some courses do. If there are spaces specifically for that, but not also like, I think the other emphasis is not puritanical of saying like, because there are English words in Welsh that have existed for hundreds of years, so you can't get, actually sometimes actually cheapen the language if you just go for what you think it should be, with like quite prescriptivist ideas. Yeah, I won't be able to resolve it, I'm afraid, but there's some ideas for you. What about from the last side of things? Okay.
Again, very good points, and it just shows how different communities approach this topic, or any topic we talk about. I'm going to give you one more example, and that might reflect the issue I have with the majority influence and just accepting it as is. It's the verb to miss someone, gonjelu, in my dialect. So when I miss you, I say gomanjeli, I miss you, and that's well established. This verb group, by the way, is called dative verbs, and they have been more influenced by the Turkish grammar than the ergative verbs. Interestingly enough, the ergative is still very strong in Lodz, However, now, if I ask someone older or someone further north, how would you say I miss you instead of I missed you? They would say gomanchele or gomanchelesh. The R, as I said earlier. And when I ask younger people now, though, they would say ma si gomanchelen, which essentially again means I, you, I miss him, her. So, as you can see, the great example here is in the past tense, we do it across all generations. But in the present tense, younger people started mixing it with Turkish influence. And how do you accommodate that then? Because then you're starting to create more exceptions and irregularities that did not exist in the language, actually. And I think because of my project, I was working on a verb conjugator. You can find it on my website, and I'm sure people will see it. And because of that verb conjugator, I had to write a script that is cohesive, that makes sense. But when you have these exceptions, they just don't add up. And they make it actually harder for learners to learn the language because it doesn't make any sense. Why would you say it this way if the grammar does exist to accommodate the subject-object reflection? And the answer, again, I was asking you guys, I don't think anyone has a real 100% fitting answer for anyone. It's just something we have to accept the way it is. I can tell you from my perspective, I did write the script in a way that does not accommodate these exceptions or this influence. But I'm currently reworking it slightly. So in the future, we can accommodate these irregularities. Though in my classroom, I do mention it, for example. I do mention people say it this way, but grammatically speaking, it should be this way. And it's also said this way in some communities from your dialect. So I hope that makes sense. It's just a very, very touchy subject, I think. But yeah. So yeah, Matthew, can you tell me a bit more about the code switching and how it's perceived? Because like, to give you an example of my family, I think what I noticed is there is a certain way of acceptance for code switching in a specific way, I think the majority way. But if you don't do it the same way, if you don't mix the Turkish and the Laz the right way, then it's frowned upon and they don't accept it that way.
Yeah, well, I'm not expert, I'm learning. But yeah, code switching usually works in kind of the same ways, actually. Like I've read multiple works, like you can have different theories about it, but usually, essentially, it works like on a matrix language base where you have like a language that provides a grammatical input. And then you have like the other language that puts like usually the lexical or some verbs to like that kind of input. In hegemonic minority language settings, I would say usually the grammatical input is put in the minority language, and then we add like lexical items in the dominant language. It's not always true though, because we talked about like a grammatical interference also, like the influence, right, before. So code switching will work in that kind of sense. It's like we have it's not also like restricted to different languages. Code switching can also mean like different ideolects, sociolects, dialects too. So it's a wide. There, I think like we should focus on dominant language and minority language code switching, and well, it is super widespread. I don't want to speak for everyone, but I would say like that's one of the most common things that happens in our settings. It is also a way to develop strategies to also like communicate other stuff with in informal settings, for example, but not only. Everyone does it, like all of the ages. Like maybe younger people do it more often, but adults do it too. Even old people do it. And the thing is, like, maybe before people didn't think about it, but then with also like the heavy use of discourse markers, which are one of the predominant discourse markers are like, by the way, that kind of words that we use to fill our speech, right? So they are heavily used. That's one of the main code switching uses, and they are used for a shit ton of reasons. Frankly, like it can be to correct yourself or to add emphasis or so on, and that is super widespread, both with Spanish and with French. you even have, there is a little town, well, not so little, but like a town in the border between the northern and southern Basque country, Endaya. They can even do it with Spanish, French, and Basque simultaneously, like in the same sentence, have 3 languages. So that can also happen. And yeah, like usually what happens is the discourse markers, some connectors. Also, we would put like a whole like syntagms, like world, like I don't know, like a group of nouns and insert it right into it. Maybe we can start the sentence in Basque and finish it in French. That's also really usual. There's also like inter-sentence code switching, where we will put like one sentence in Basque and the next one to, for whatever reason, it can be to paraphrase someone, it can be to add emphasis or to tell a joke. We will do it in French. So it's really complex, but it happens to everyone. In my research, everyone does it. Like there is no exception to the rule. And there are like some studies that say that, and that's a really interesting thing, that people that have learned Basque later in life are more conscious about it and try not to code switch to prove their Basqueness. So they try to be like more conscious of the choice of the words they do. But for example, like if you take someone that's Euskaldun Basque from a little small town that speaks almost like always Basque, they will do it overtly and they won't even notice, and they will really think they are just speaking in Basque without noticing they are using like Spanish or French words. So there is also like that duality, and that is really interesting to see. And I also noticed that in my interviews, like people that had like more difficulty speaking in Basque were also like more conscious about not inserting French words sometimes. So like that's a little, I don't know if that answered your question, but like that's a really 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 small overview of it. I don't know if yeah,
Felix was laughing quite a bit, so maybe when I hear what he thinks.
Yeah,
I mean, all that happens in Welsh as well. It's just so interesting when everything you described. Like, I was also laughing when you said people who've learned the language try not to code switch as well. I mean, I do that. I'm definitely because obviously I can speak Welsh with a Welsh accent, but if you hear my English accent, you're obviously going to know, not in the sense that I'm trying to hide the fact I'm English, but when I was learning, I was afraid that if people heard, if they clocked on that I was learning or having difficulty and heard a strong English accent, that they would just switch to English immediately, which can happen. It depends where you go, but those things are so they happen. It's not unique to Welsh either. It's referred to as Wenglish in Welsh, in the Welsh context. But I think you're right. It's a spectrum as well, because sometimes Wenglish means that they speak almost entirely Welsh, but with English words in it at times. And then sometimes it's like set phrases, and like you say, and then it goes to where people can't finish or start a sentence just in Welsh. I'm not an expert in this or well trained in it, but one of the things is usually I've been led to believe is that it's usually a sign of it's in certain contexts that it's a lack of language ability as well, because it shows that you're more comfortable in the dominant language than the other, unless you live in a truly bilingual setting. But you're right, and also people who are actually not comfortable as comfortable in Welsh do actually, to a point, try not to use certain English terms or phrases. There's a whole spectrum of it. And I actually anecdotally had to interview candidates for a job where I work to just test their Welsh level, and it was very interesting. There's only one who was actually a native Welsh speaker, and 2 were from Welsh speaking areas in theory. Well, 3, excluding the native Welsh speaker, and 1 was also supposedly first language, and could not hold a conversation in Welsh, unfortunately, and was answering at a level that you would not think if he was first language, and also from an area that was Welsh speaking until pretty recently, you would expect, but obviously it's not to shame or anything like that. And then other people who made a really concentrated effort. One of them who only speaks Welsh to their one of their grandparents, like there was so much potential. But I was asked to say what did I report, and one of them was a native speaker from a Welsh language majority area. I was like, well, what do you want me to say? This person's a native Welsh speaker, where people 80% plus speak Welsh. It's quite hard, you know. It's not. I wouldn't say it's unfair, but it where you know, in the end, where do you draw the line? Because one of them, I said this person has a lot of potential. So that happens in Basque and Latin.
I also want to say that you can learn to code switch. Like, for example, I'm from San Sebastian, so I knew how to code switch with my peers and with my parents and everything, but like, there are codes too. And when I moved to Bayona, I couldn't code switch as I did in Spanish and Basque, like in Donostia. Like, it just doesn't exist. So I had to learn to fit into the peer group of my like age, how to code switch with French. So it's like you can also learn how to do it, and I think that's a really interesting point about it. So I just wanted to add that.
You're right. There's a Welsh language code switching as well that people learn.
Yeah, something I learned as well. I mean, growing up, obviously, I was bilingual as well, but not with Lars. And then, like my example earlier was more about the learner. Like when I was starting to learn the language and I was code switching. It was not the correct code switching for them. The unwritten rules were not fulfilled, so like they just rejected me immediately. It's like, come back when you speak it. So yeah, it was really interesting talking to you guys today. Lots of similarities, quite a few differences as well. Bit of inspiration there, how to deal with it, even though none of us have a perfect answer to something that probably doesn't have a perfect answer to begin with. It's very interesting to see the code switching you just mentioned and explained to me, Maddi, and how it's used in different languages and different settings. And it explains a little bit my background when I was first learning the language, and I was just immediately rejected the way I was code switching because it's not the code switching they expected. It's also interesting to see how you, Felix, said Welshified words of English origin in Welsh is still more acceptable than just straight out speaking English. And that's something I noticed in the Lars community as well. We tend to accept the Lazified Turkish words more than straight up Lars words with roots that are not detectable anymore. Like, even if the root is Lars, native speakers might not understand it. So it was really interesting speaking to both of you. And I would love to have some sort of, maybe we can do a seminar on that, a combined Basque, Welsh, Lars seminar on how to correctly, so to speak, introduce loan words into our languages or structures from other languages into our languages. Yeah, thank you guys.
So I will go on. Thank you so much, guys. It was really interesting to listen to you, and I always find it kind of fascinating to listen to others speak and say, oh my God, like you just described what I feel every day. Even though it happens every time, I'm always like, it's so crazy. It was really interesting for me to, like, even though I knew like the theory of like the code switching rules, it's true, like I didn't have a problem with it, and listening to someone like you can tell me like, oh, I wasn't accepted because I didn't do like the right code switching was super interesting actually. And yeah, like also like getting to know how Welsh like deals with it, and it was also interesting to know that you had like that kind of self-doubt of using English words because of your accent. I hadn't really thought of it either before, so that's another layer that we can add to like which dominant language accent should we use also when we are code switching in our languages, right? So overall it was a great conversation. I would love to keep talking to you guys and with you guys about this, and yeah, open to everything. I'm still learning too, so that was great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this really interesting talk. It's given me a lot to think about. I think this is one of the reasons why I'm interested in the international side of things and learning about other minoritized languages. I think is a very, maybe I'd say sobering, but also it's a very grounding thing to know that other people have similar experiences. It doesn't have to be the same. I think there probably there's some more crossovers at times with Basque and Welsh in certain aspects, and then but facing these challenges, the way it's felt, how it arrives there, there's certainly other aspects where it's close with Laz, and I want to know how do you experience it, how does it make you feel, and then also if you have any answers, I'll be very grateful to know. I'm always happy to collaborate on the international level, which is why I stood for international officer with Cymdeithas. It's always a privilege to talk to people from other communities. Thank you.